Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
Let's go to Justin in New York. How are you? Thanks for waiting. Welcome to the Hangout.
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Better as the show goes on.
Hey. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of share a little insight, if I may, with some of the listeners about my perspective on some of the things the president has been saying for the past 5 years. I'm a journalist, and I'm based in New York right now, New York State. But the fake news thing, I think we've been a little bit desensitized to it, because it's been happening since he started his campaign. But I mean, some of the things that, and there are just so many instances, but some of the things that he's been saying are just such outrageous accusations. I mean, serious accusations. One that kind of comes to the top of my mind is when the New York Times released some information about his taxes, and he was interviewed on camera, and they said that he said that they made it up, just made it up. I mean, he just said it kind of off the cuff, but it's that is such a serious accusation. And if it was even remotely true, the journalists their careers would be over, and they would leave the industry in disgrace. And I mean, unfortunately, that rhetoric has just caused a lot of his followers to totally distrust legitimate media. And I mean, I'm definitely for having the conversation, keeping the conversation open about bias and ethics. But when you call legitimate news organizations fake news, it just kind of opens up this can of worms that is basically might be impossible to close, I think, for a while. And then it affects everyone in the industry. And I know so many local journalists who are so important. I mean, journalists in general are so important to democracy. They're the unofficial fourth branch of the government. And there would be so much corruption allowed to happen.
Justin, I'm just going to pause you for 1 second because I just want to echo that. I wrote about that in the piece that Matt and I were just talking about at the beginning of the show about Joel Osteen getting the $4 million in PPP money. Same thing about Marcus Lamb and then buying the jet. We know about those because journalists went out and found those. And so I was... At the end of the piece, I'm kind of trying to defend the Fourth Estate. I'm right there with you. It was Trump's first press conference when he attacked Jim Acosta and said right to Jim Acosta's face, "You're CNN, you're fake news." And from that, before that moment, really, it was picked up by his supporters. I mean, he didn't call CNN fake news because that was true. It's because he didn't like what was happening. He didn't like being challenged. And then his followers, people like Matt Staver from the Liberty Council, even Bill Donahue from the Catholic League did this. They just attached that phrase to anything that they didn't like. And then just like that, you had the people who need to most understand the dangers of fake news, credulous Americans, only understand that it's an epithet that you hurl at those who you disagree with. So instead of it being an issue or truth of truth or falsity, it's now all about, are you with me or are you against me? I mean, it was really just remarkable to watch those words be destroyed.
I have a really strange question that when it first popped into my head, my first instinct was, no, that's a terrible idea. That is terrifying. That is, okay. So I'm in favor of getting rid of the Senate. And I was wondering if we get rid of the Senate and we use all the resources that are currently being sent to manage and run the Senate, and instead create a proper fourth estate where you have a not so much a branch of the government in a political aspect, but a government-funded, independent journalism thing, so that it was the job. It gets terrifying, because then it's like,
you're
oh,
seeing
here's
the
what
problems as you're saying it.
says.
Yeah.
Here's what the state has to say, but now we're a real news source. But if we could actually set up unparalleled legal protections, so that no journalist ever has to necessarily be dragged into court to be face contempt charges for not revealing sources on stuff, or I don't know. This is not my game. I would never use the word journalist to remotely describe anything I've ever done, even when I read news reports. But it seems that the independent journalistic model has fared no better, and is just as easily dismissed as fake news as soon as Dear Leader says, "Oh, you're listening." There are people who are calling Fox News liberal now, and that come on.
It's
how long before OAN and the rest of them are considered liberal too, just because they finally acknowledge that President Trump is done on January 20th?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw the problem as you were saying it, right? Because you have to have the independence is what provides the check. I mean, you'd have to figure out a way to make the funding truly, truly independent. That like it goes to an independent body, and then that body distributes. I mean, and I think to a certain extent there are grants done for investigative journalism and things like that. But you really have to put a lot of checks, and you'd have to make it so that the government couldn't turn off the spigot.
If you go back, if you go back 100 years to the average person, their access to information, and the process by which they're going to make a decision for president. People lament the old days when, oh, well, the Republicans and the Democrats, and, we could vote, we could reach across the aisle, and we could work together. But now the division is so strong. But that divisiveness didn't come from nowhere. It came from who we are. I mean, while more people voted in this election than ever, more people voted for Joe Biden than have ever voted for anyone in the history of the United States. And yet still we're as divided as ever. If you go back to Bush v. Gore and you had basically an election stolen with less than 1,000 votes. And then Al Gore gets up and basically says, I disagree with the decision, but I'm going to support it. There was a time when I could point to people on both sides of the aisle and say, these are people who genuinely care about America, who have disagreements about what the best course of action is, and mostly argue in good faith on behalf of those disagreements, and then sometimes exploit the power where you have, well, we've got the numbers, so we're going to filibuster, or we've got the numbers and we're going to, stick this in a drawer and put riders on it and shut it all down. There's ways to manipulate the system, but things today are different. I don't feel that there's ever a point where we've been more divided and where it became so obvious how closely divided we are. I'm happy that Georgia flipped. I'm happy for all of the states that where people came out and showed up. But to pretend we're not still a nation massively divided would be a huge mistake.
I mean, I think that's true, but I think you're right to say that we've always been this way. I mean, in the Federalist Papers, which argued for the ratification of the Constitution, you have Madison and Hamilton deeply worried about factions, which was another word for political parties, worrying about political parties forming in the nascent republic. And it happened in George Washington's cabinet. Right. I mean, it happened almost immediately. And since then, we have been a house divided, as Lincoln put it, during the Civil War. Right. Like it has happened throughout our history. And I just want to touch real quick. If you go read some of like the stories of the early voting in this country, it's pretty amazing compared to what you see today. Like James Madison and George Washington, these guys in Virginia, to get votes just used to get everybody drunk, just used to buy barrels and barrels and bottles of liquor and wine for the voters. And it was expected. Like if you wanted them to vote, you basically had to throw a kegger to get people to the polls, and they would come get hammered and then cast their vote for you because you bought them all the beer. Like it really is remarkable. Well, I'll leave it at that. I could go on that forever. And Justin, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, this is great. I will say one quick thing. The thing that Matt mentioned about having sort of like maybe a government sort of section for journalists. I mean, there is something that's popping up right now that maybe I think might be the future of journalism, which is a lot of nonprofits are launching publications that are, and because they're part of a nonprofit, they're able to get grants and just a lot more, donations and a lot more financing to support the journalism. And so the journalists actually get a reasonable living wage, unlike many of the papers right now. Decent vacation. So I mean, I am hoping that is something that we see popping up more and more, because there's some really great journalism coming out of those publications.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea too, because it also, I mean, if you get rid of the profit motive on news and journalism too, I mean that you don't get Fox News, right?
Right.
So that really is interesting.
Yeah.
It's strange to me, and watching, there are Republicans, current Republicans, perhaps a handful of, that I can still respect and have a conversation with. A handful of them are journalists. A handful of them are actually elected representatives. Some of them are just general people who have certain ideas that I know how they got there, and they're not out to destroy the LGBTQIA community, and they're not, trying to take away reproductive rights and all this other stuff. They just have some bad ideas. I'd love to get back to the days when I could actually sit down and have a conversation with those people, because quite frankly, I have not been able to have a conversation with any of them for about 4 to 5 years. It's because we've gotten to the point where it's, here's my group. Literally, I'm going to use an example from Twitter that irritated me a bit today, but I want to let you go, Justin, because I don't want to keep you hanging on. So are you hanging up on us, or are we going to hang up on you?
Oh,
okay.
Just the silent, man.
I like the silent fuck you type thing.
I mean, it hurts a little more.
Something happened today on Twitter, and it's a mild thing, and I don't want anybody to go look, and I don't want to launch, my followers after somebody. That's not the purpose of this. But somebody asked a question after I linked out about tonight's show, and they were like, do we like Matt Dillahunty? At a cursory glance, I don't see any red flags, but I feel like I've heard leftists speaking out against him before, but I'm not exactly sure if that's correct. Any input, anyone? And I said, what a strange question. Do we like him? Like, maybe make up your own mind, or ask the person you're talking about, especially if you have just a vague feeling. The whole notion of who do we like coming from someone who doesn't have information is just strange. Well, the person got a little upset and claimed that my response was hostile and name calling. And I'm like, saying it's a strange question is not really hostility and defensive name calling on my behalf. But he then called me out for, why wouldn't I reply to him by saying, well, what do you mean? Or here I am right here talking to me. So he's ironically wanting to go out and publicly on Twitter ask, what's wrong with Matt? Should I like Matt or not? And when I say, dude, I'm right here, he's like, well, you could have just said, dude, I'm right here. It doesn't make sense to me. Tune in, watch the show, make up your own mind, ask questions. I'm about as accessible as you're going to find of all the figures in the atheist movement. Folks like Andrew and I just make ourselves available, and I do so more than most. Like, you can come on my Twitch channel and get yourself banned, which happens over and over again, because people come on my Twitch channel and do stupid things to have a sort of banning thing there. But it's so strange that we live in a world now where I can't have conversations with people that I genuinely care about and have honest disagreements with because everything is politicized and fake and nobody trusts anything. I'm hoping we recover.
Yeah. I mean, part of that, though, right, is Twitter is where nuance goes to die. So, I mean, part of that is I also think there's so much that there's so much that is lost when you're communicating with somebody on social media and just typing words to another set of words on the screen where you can't see the intonation and all that. There's so much that gets lost in that. And if you're having a bad moment, you tend to put the worst possible spin on it. If you're having a good moment, you might be more willing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. So I think social media just degrades the discourse just massively. But it also is this weird equalizer in that anybody all of a sudden has access to you. It's super easy, and so you see them saying this thing about you, it does not play to the better aspects of our nature.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of big secrets. People who think that they pretty much know me from seeing me are right that they pretty much do. I mean, what you see is what you get.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.